Well, the area where I feel like there's been a bit of a mental lapse, and I don't take this lightly, is in this idea that the election somehow represents a shift towards more right-wing politics, that there's been a successful move to capture a generation of people and make them more right-wing than they were. And that this election actually demonstrates that that shift has been very successful for the right-wing. There really isn't positive evidence for that within the election, and I'll get to that in a moment. There's really not much evidence, and in fact, it is so counterfactual that it feels like they haven't really engaged their critical mind on the subject. Now, how can I say that? I mean, Donald Trump won the popular vote. He didn't win the previous election, and indeed, he has done much better than our polling suggested. So how can I say that there hasn't been a right-wing shift? Well, Donald Trump actually lost votes in the 2024 election. That is, he gained less votes over the 2020 election. Quick note, while finishing this video, I learned that there are still some states counting votes, which means it is quite likely that Donald Trump will have more votes than he did in 2020. However, that does not mean that there's been a significant enough rightward shift to be explained through a cultural change. In fact, in 2016, both parties received considerably fewer votes due to population changes. So I believe the rest of this video's point still stands, although with an asterisk about some of the numbers. Now, you might say, how could he have possibly won then if he actually got fewer votes? Well, the Democrats lost somewhere between 10 and 15 million votes over their last showing, which shows to me a lack of support for the Democratic Party, not logically a expansion of the interest in the Republicans. I mean, the winning of the popular vote doesn't mean that more people are now aligned themselves with Donald Trump. It means that fewer people align themselves with the Democratic Party. Now, there's many reasons for why that would be. That has nothing to do with a rightward shift. A more logical solution would be that the Democrats offered nothing that these voters found enticing enough to get them to the polls. They didn't not vote hoping that Donald Trump would win. They just didn't go to the polls. You could argue maybe there's been a rightward shift anyway. Maybe folks like Joe Rogan and Andrew Tate and various other right-wing grifters have actually been very successful at moving young people in a rightward direction, and we're going to expect an increasing level of right-wing violence over the next 4 years. I mean, I would expect that regardless of the number of people involved, because there'll be more direct support by Donald Trump. But the election itself isn't a demonstration of that, and there's plenty of counter evidence. Statistically, over decades, we see a vast increase in the support for LGBTQ rights. Research over the last decade has shown a vast increase in popular support for socialism and greater criticism for capitalism, even among Republicans. Ballot initiatives that came with the 2024 election have had a very left-wing bias, even in red states, so to speak. Red states where Donald Trump did very well. We've actually seen several ballot initiatives that the left wasn't able to do under the Democrats. For example, there's been 9 states that voted on reproductive rights, that is, abortion rights in their state. Of those, 7 passed with a majority supporting an expansion of abortion rights. Those rights were never enshrined by the Democrats. They were relying on the Roe versus Wade decision and didn't ever codify anything into law. Now there are several states that are going to have in their constitution protections for abortion. That just wasn't ever done under the Democratic Party. So we've actually seen very successful left-wing movement in those red states. We've also seen an increase in the minimum wage in several states and an increase in family leave and sick leave, as well as some supports for unionization laws in those states thanks to these ballot initiatives, as well as many conservation laws passed. And in those places where abortion rights even failed, in some cases, they failed by a significant margin. But in the case of Florida, for example, the law was only recently changed to increase the threshold from 50% or 51% to 60%, and the abortion laws barely didn't make that threshold. In other words, they almost made that threshold, but since the threshold was expanded, it became more difficult. I've seen many people who think and strongly believe that Donald Trump is going to do things like expand Medicare, and he's going to bring back jobs and create union jobs. These are, of course, all fantasies based on Donald Trump's actual beliefs and actions. But these are all left-wing beliefs that the right has just claimed as their own. So to argue that the election demonstrates a rightward shift in politics is just not only contrary to evidence in terms of the numbers of people who actually voted, but it's actually contrary to the success of many ballot initiatives that the left would have liked to achieve under the Democrats and failed to do. What is much more reasonable is that the Democrats have been too centrist, have not appealed to their base significantly enough. There might be other explanations, and we can get into that in greater detail. But the narrative that is now building that the right wing is too powerful as a result of this election, that the right wing has actually taken over people's minds, and people no longer care about their fellow person, and they now want to see a complete destruction of various rights, is just not borne out by the evidence. And I would go even a step further than that. There are numerous videos by these same content creators showing just how ignorant some of these non-voters or undecided voters or independents are, often just openly mocking them for not knowing certain things, being unaware of what's happening at Donald Trump's rallies and other things like that. And now they're saying that these same people are decidedly fascists, that they're decidedly want Donald Trump to win. How can it both be possible that these people who are voting for Donald Trump, that are his supporters or that are undecided voters, are just so ignorant that we can mock them, and also that they know every nuance of the Republican policy and of Project 2025 and wholly endorse it? It's an irrational position. I would argue that there's quite a large number of Republican supporters, people who voted for Donald Trump in this election, who don't even know what policies he's going to be moving forward because they haven't been following the election, like people who are more politically engaged. The things that we take for granted, that we know all this information about what Donald Trump's been up to, most people don't have that information, and they don't necessarily have an active source. Their algorithm may push away from them some of this factual information, and their local area might be dominated by right-wing radio stations, so there's no way to know this factual information. So to make the leap that these people are both ignorant and know exactly what they're doing is also irrational. So we have fewer votes won than previous years. We also have just low voter turnout. We have evidence of successful ballot initiatives that have run contrary to this narrative. And we also have plenty of cases where the same analysts were saying a few weeks ago just how ignorant these particular voters were, and now we're saying that they wholeheartedly support something to which they were previously ignorant. That's just an irrational and illogical criticism, and that's not an unreasonable thing to experience when there's a great and fundamental loss that goes against somebody's expectations and their hopes and dreams, as well as the research that they themselves have done. It can be really a demoralizing experience. So perhaps in a short order, these same left-wing commentators will restore their mind, but let's hope that they don't glom onto a narrative that is lacking in empirical evidence, that is running contrary to the evidence we have in front of us. Let's continue to say that if you are a left-wing person, you want to push your representatives to move on issues that have great populist appeal. Things like ending medical debt, ending student loan debt, ending the genocides and wars in other countries, and committing to improving and expanding democracy and voting rights. Because if the Democrats or any party wants to win, they aren't going to win by chasing imaginary votes that don't exist. They're going to better be served by following trends that we have empirical evidence for. And that's the direction I'm hoping that these analysts move to once the grief and anger has subsided.